Today we're going to be looking at topic 4, coordinate applications involving parallelograms. So the important thing to note is coordinate means that I'm dealing with x's and y's and putting it on a plane. So for example 1, you can see that I just drew some random parallelogram and put it on an xy axis. And I'm asking you to find b. So how do I find b? I'm going to look at how I get from one point to another. And this is always how I find slope. I'm looking at patterns. So when I say, how do I get from 3, 6, 9, 12, what are the next 3 in that? I multiply or I add 3 every single time. I look for the pattern. So I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to use my coordinates. How do I get from 0 to 5? I add 5. So on the other side, because my opposite sides are congruent, how do I get from 8 to here? I'm going to add 5 again. So what is 8 plus 5? 13. So that's my first coordinate. Now the next time, I'm going to look at the y coordinate. How do I get from 0 to 6? I add 6. So over here, I'm going to add 6 again. 0 plus 6 is 6. So my y coordinate is 6. For example 2, it's a little bit different because I'm missing a couple of different variables. So I have to look into that. So first I'm going to say, how do I get from 0 to x? Well, x is any number, so I add x. How do I get from 8 to here? I add x again, so it becomes 8 plus x. And I say, okay, well, let's look at the other side now. How do I get from 0 to 5? I add 5. So to get from here to here, I'm going to add 5 again, and I get y plus 5, which could go here. So just because it has variables in my answer, don't get confused or frustrated. That happens. So let's go down and look at the next problem, the next example. So the next example starts with me plotting these points. So I'm going to take a second and plot the points. So now I plotted my 4 points. I went over 2, up 5 to get A, over 5, up 9 to get B, over 6, up 3 to get C, and over 3, up negative or down -1, down -1 to get D. So if I connect these points, I'll see a quadrilateral, but do I know if it's a parallelogram or not? So now that I have my parallelogram, I'm going to use the distance formula. And I'm going to try to see, I'm going to look at AB and see how big it is. Now I'm going off the fact that one side is both parallel and congruent. So I need to find the distance between A to B and the slope of AB. So A is 2, 5 and B is 5, 9. So when I plug that into the distance formula, it looks like this. Now that I've plugged in those 2 points, the other thing that I could have done, which is pretty important to notice since we just learned about the quadratic formula, is I could have made a right triangle and counted the boxes. I would have gotten a 4 here and a 3 here. So these numbers, when I actually simplify them, I get 3 squared plus 4 squared, which is 9 plus 16, or 25. And what's the square root of 25? 5. Now the most amazing part to this is when I find the slope, which is rise over run, I've already found it. I've gotten my rise was 4 and my run was 3. Just by making the triangle to do the Pythagorean theorem. So now we're going to look at CD. CD is here. I will fill in the quadratic or the distance formula first, and then I will use a triangle. So I've now plugged it into the distance formula, but I can see that I have another triangle sitting right here. and it's a right triangle. And if I count the spaces, this is 3 and this is 4. If I were to simplify CD here, I would see that this would be 3 squared, this would be 4 squared, which once again, it looks exactly like this. I'm going to take the time to go ahead and simplify that, which is the square root of 25 or 5. Now, the slope of CD, my rise was 4 and my run was 3. So I have to ask myself, does AB equal, is it the same as CD? 5 and 5. So yes, they're congruent. Now how about parallel? Lines with the same slope are parallel. So these two sets of opposite sides, AB and CD, are both parallel and congruent. So this is a parallelogram. So I can use the distance formula and slope formula to determine whether or not these things are parallelograms. So go complete your practice.